Every 5 years or so, the water industry plans water and sewerage projects needed to support Melbourne's growing population. Melbourne's water businesses work out the cost of these projects and, in turn, the prices they need to charge customers. They then lay out these proposals in their water plans. The next 5-year water plans include the money needed to continue paying for the Victorian desalination plant. You are here today as part of a consultation process for how best to pass the desalination plant costs on to customers, particularly over the next 5 years. Melbourne Water is one of a number of organisations involved in the process of setting water prices. Melbourne Water is owned by the Victorian Government and is the water and sewerage wholesaler. Its customers are Yarra Valley Water, City West Water, South East Water and Western Water, who provide services directly to you. Working on behalf of the community, Melbourne Water manages the city's major reservoirs, treats and supplies drinking water, removes and treats sewage, and manages waterways and drainage systems. These services are essential to the development and prosperity of our community and region. You pay for these services through your water bill. The Essential Services Commission acts as an independent umpire in reviewing and approving prices. A part of this process is consulting with the community, and the Commission has asked Melbourne Water to get community feedback on some options. Your opinions today will be taken into consideration, along with other factors, to develop what option Melbourne Water will recommend to the Essential Services Commission. A key part of the current plan is the money needed to pay for the desalination plant. The plant was fully funded and built by a private consortium on behalf of the state government. One of its benefits is that it acts as a water supply insurance policy for Melbourne, as, if required, it can supply up to 150 billion litres of rainfall-independent water a year. In today's dollars, over the next 27 years, the costs of the desalination plant will go from around $630 million in 2013 to around $400 million in 2039. That is an average of around $500 million per year over the next 27 years. Melbourne Water must pay these costs. This annual cost will become Melbourne Water's biggest item of expenditure. Despite a focus on efficiency and keeping costs down, Melbourne Water is proposing a price increase, mostly due to the cost of the desalination plant. Other key projects include maintenance of current infrastructure and catering for Melbourne's growth. This means that the average water bill will increase by around $200 in 2013, going from around $900 to $1,100. This is the only price rise intended for the 5-year plan. After 2013, prices are planned to increase by CPI only for the next 4 years. The water industry needs to find the best way to pass on these costs in such a way that balances the needs of current and future customers and the need for Melbourne Water to remain financially responsible. The desalination plant has been built and needs to be paid for. Melbourne Water's requirement to pay the costs of the desalination plant builder and operator within 27 years cannot change. But Melbourne Water can alter the timeframe over which it collects money from customers. So the costs of the desalination plant could be recovered by the water business from customers through prices over 27 years. This matches the period over which Melbourne Water makes the contract payments. Or through prices over 50 years, which is the expected life of the plant and the time during which the community gets the benefit of the plant. The things that need to be balanced are the impact on customer bills, the legacy for the next generation, and responsible financial management of Melbourne Water. Customers will pay the same total amount under both approaches. The key difference is the timeframes over which they are making these payments, so when bills will be higher or lower. So the bill increases can vary depending on the timeframes over which costs are being collected, in this case 27 or 50 years. Spreading the recovery of the costs from customers over 27 years results in higher bills for the next 27 years and lower bills from year 28. Spreading the recovery of the costs from customers over 50 years results in lower bills for the next 27 years but higher bills from year 28. If the customer payments are spread over 50 years, depending on the option implemented, this might reduce the average bill by $5 to $10 per year for the first 27 years. While Melbourne Water has to pay for the plant over the 27-year contract, people in Melbourne will have the benefit of the water supply insurance policy that the plant is expected to provide for 50 years. So this raises the question of whether, as a community, we should pay things off as soon as possible or spread payments over a longer period, in this case, into the next generation. One perspective is that the costs should be shared with the next generation, making bills lower than they would have been over the next 27 years. The argument is that the next generation should pay as well, because people over the next 50 years will benefit from having the plant there to use if they need to. On the flip side is the view that Melburnians should pay for the plant over the next 27 years, so that the next generation won't have to pay off the continuing debt. In weighing up the issue, we'd like you to consider how the timeframe options for recovering costs would also impact Melbourne Water. Melbourne Water, like any business, borrows money to build infrastructure. For example, over the last 5 years, Melbourne Water has delivered $3.7 billion in major sewer and water projects, which have delivered significant community benefits. Borrowings have increased to fund those projects, so currently Melbourne Water is carrying an historically high amount of debt. Melbourne Water needs sufficient cash flows to meet its interest costs and start to repay debt so that it can maintain a good credit rating and continue to keep the costs of borrowing, like interest rates, as low as possible. Spreading the costs over 50 years will require Melbourne Water to increase its borrowings. This is to cover the gap between the money needed to pay the $500 million a year for the plant and the money coming in from customer bills. This option might increase borrowings by around $80 million over the next 5 years. Additional borrowing over the first 27 years impacts debt levels and can affect credit ratings and cash flow. While Melbourne Water will have to pay more over the 27 years to cover interest from these additional borrowings, after 27 years, Melbourne Water will no longer be paying the contract costs of the plant, but will be receiving income which can be invested. So over the 50 years, these two aspects essentially balance each other out. The Essential Services Commission allows Melbourne Water to make a reasonable return to ensure that it has money in reserve to invest in the future, pay down debt, meet unexpected changes in circumstances, and make a return to the shareholder, the Victorian Government, without having to reduce services to customers. The 27-year proposal should make sufficient profit to cover unexpected events such as bushfires, floods, and changes in the economy. There is also enough of a profit to make it unlikely that Melbourne Water would need to go back to the Essential Services Commission to ask for prices to increase further during the 5 years. Under the 50-year proposal, there would be less profit in the initial 5 years, which would impact on Melbourne Water's ability to provide certainty to customers, meaning that if unexpected events occurred, there would be a higher chance that Melbourne Water would need to ask for prices to increase further during the 5 years. So that's where we're at. Now we're interested in hearing from you.